There was a time when her laughter could disarm me. It was sharp, melodic, the kind of sound that could have lit up a room, if only it hadn't been aimed at me. Grace had a way of turning even the smallest moments into something cruel, as if her affection came bundled with ridicule, and I swallowed it. For years, I convinced myself that it was love wrapped in sarcasm, teasing with a hint of tenderness. But the truth is, it chipped away at me, quietly and methodically, like waves wearing down a stone. "You're really going to wear that?" she'd say, arching an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. No, it's fine. I'm sure the 90s are coming back, eventually." The worst part? She didn't even wait for a reaction. She'd just move on, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, as if her words didn't hang in the air like smoke from a slow burn. Mockery was her favorite language, and for a while, I learned to speak it too, laughing off the jabs, pretending they didn't sting. But they did. Her voice followed me into meetings, into mirror reflections, into the quiet places of my own mind. Every joke at my expense came with a silent question: am I really this small? I remember once, early on, when we were at a dinner party with her friends. Someone brought up career changes, and I mentioned the idea of starting my own consulting firm. Before anyone else could respond, Grace snorted into her wineglass. "Daniel starting a business," she said, eyes wide with faux surprise. "Only if it involves losing money and forgetting appointments." Laughter erupted around the table, more from social reflex than humor. I laughed too, my default defense. But inside, I was unraveling. That wasn't just a joke. That was her putting a leash on my ambition, right there in front of people who barely knew me. And worse, she knew it. Over time, her mockery evolved. It didn't need crowds anymore. It crept into the mundane, the way I washed the dishes, the music I liked, the way I stretched in the mornings. Every little habit was fair game, every vulnerable part of me slowly turned into a punchline. "You're so sensitive, Daniel," she'd say when I flinched at her remarks. "Can't you take a joke?" That phrase, that cruel little phrase, became her shield. And I let her hide behind it for years. I don't know when exactly I stopped laughing. Maybe it was the day I realized that none of her jokes made me smile anymore. Or maybe it was when I caught myself apologizing for things I hadn't even done. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at a cold cup of coffee, her latest insult still echoing in my ears, and I thought, this isn't love. This is corrosion. I didn't say anything that night. I just sat there in silence. But something shifted inside me, subtle, but irreversible. A seed of clarity, buried under years of emotional noise, finally began to sprout. And for the first time, I heard her laughter not as a sound of joy, but as a warning bell. There wasn't a single dramatic explosion that marked the change in me. No shouting match, no slammed doors. It wasn't cinematic, it was quiet. Subtle. Like the moment you first realize a bruise has begun to fade, not because the pain's gone, but because you've finally stopped pressing on it. That's what it felt like with Grace. One evening, I simply stopped flinching. It happened on a Tuesday, a detail I remember because Tuesdays were her favorite day to criticize dinner. I'd made roasted chicken with thyme, nothing fancy but something comforting. She took one bite, set her fork down, and tilted her head the way she always did when preparing to deliver a snide remark. "Did the chicken insult you or something?" she said, smirking. "Because you cooked it like you're seeking revenge." Normally, I would have smiled nervously, maybe offered to make her something else. But that night, I looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in the way I saw her. I didn't see the woman I had fallen for a decade ago. I saw someone who got more satisfaction out of diminishing me than lifting me up. I saw someone who fed off the power imbalance she'd created, all under the veil of humor. I didn't respond. I just ate my dinner in silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of her words. I felt clarity. Her voice, once a hammer against my self-worth, now sounded hollow, like echoes in an empty hallway. Something had broken, not between us, but inside me, and in a strange way, it felt like healing. After dinner, I stood at the sink, washing the dishes, when it really sank in. I had spent years trying to be the version of myself that she wouldn't mock. I changed how I dressed, how I spoke, how I dreamed, just to avoid her casual cruelty. And in doing so, I had become a watered-down version of who I used to be. The man she met was gone. In his place stood a man who tiptoed around his own home, constantly seeking approval that never came. That night, I stayed up late. Not because of insomnia or anxiety, but because for the first time in years, my mind was working for me, not against me. I thought about the things I used to love: hiking in the early mornings, jazz records on Sunday afternoons, the half-finished novel I'd tucked away in the back of my closet. All of them had faded into the background of our life together, overshadowed by her criticism and my attempts to avoid it. I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, listening to a Miles Davis record I hadn't played in ages. And as the trumpet filled the silence of the house, I felt something stir inside me, a sense of self I thought I had lost. I realized I had been living as though Grace's version of me was the truth. But it wasn't. It never was. The next few days were different. She noticed, of course. She always noticed when she wasn't being entertained by someone's discomfort. She tried her usual lines, the sharp jabs hidden in sarcasm, but I didn't respond the way I used to. I didn't react with wounded silence or forced laughter. I simply didn't give her what she wanted. "You've been weird lately," she said one evening, looking up from her tablet. "Did someone put a spine in your coffee?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, genuinely this time, because I realized how powerless her words had become. That smile wasn't for her. It was for me. And the truth? She hated it. When a person builds their identity around belittling others, they become dependent on the reaction. If you remove the reaction, you take away their power. And I had finally done that. I began reclaiming pieces of myself, quietly and deliberately. I started waking up early again and going for long walks before work. I pulled my old notebook from the closet and began writing again, one page at a time. I stopped shrinking myself to fit into the cramped emotional space she allowed me, and instead, started expanding in directions she couldn't control. She responded the only way she knew how, by mocking the changes. But it didn't matter anymore. Every joke she made felt like a feather thrown at a brick wall. The sting was gone. I wasn't waiting for her to understand me anymore. I wasn't trying to fix something she had no intention of repairing. I was building a new version of myself, one brick at a time, and this time, I wasn't building it for her approval. The turning point wasn't loud, but it was final. I didn't know what my next move would be just yet. But I knew what it wouldn't be: staying. There's a moment in every broken relationship where silence becomes louder than shouting, where stillness speaks more truth than 1,000 arguments. For me, that moment came one unremarkable morning, with the smell of burnt toast lingering in the air and Grace's voice droning in the background about how I never bought the right brand of peanut butter. It wasn't her worst remark, not by far. But it was the first time I realized that nothing I did, or didn't do, would ever be enough for her. Not in her eyes. And more importantly, not for me anymore. I had once believed that if I just tried harder, worked longer hours, made more money, stayed calmer, cooked better, learned to read her moods with precision, maybe then she'd finally see me as someone worthy of kindness. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen with the scent of burnt bread curling around us, I understood something I had ignored for too long: no amount of bending would make her stop breaking me. That afternoon, while she was out at one of her networking brunches that she never invited me to, I walked into our bedroom and looked around. The bed was made to her standards: tight corners, 3 decorative pillows, one of which I wasn't allowed to sleep on. Her side table was cluttered with expensive serums and skincare jars, tiny rituals she performed each night as though they might scrub the bitterness from her soul. My side, by contrast, was sparse. Just a lamp, a worn paperback, and a glass coaster I never used. I stared at the space we'd shared for nearly 10 years and saw it clearly for the first time, not as a haven, but as a holding cell. A place where I slept next to someone who made me feel lonelier than when I was alone. The realization didn't crush me. It calmed me. Because I knew what had to come next. I didn't pack that day. I wasn't running away, and I didn't want to leave in a flurry of angry decisions. I wanted to do this deliberately, on my terms, with clarity. So I made a plan. I began setting money aside, quietly, in a separate account. I started researching apartments, therapists, divorce attorneys. I moved through my days like a ghost with a secret. I was leaving her, but she didn't know it yet. Over the next few weeks, I stopped participating in our cycles. When she mocked me, I didn't flinch. When she belittled my thoughts, I no longer tried to defend them. Her cruelty became background noise, like a faucet dripping in the next room, annoying, but no longer capable of drowning me. She noticed the change, of course. Her jabs became sharper, more desperate, like a child poking at a toy that no longer responds. "You think you're some kind of Zen master now," she sneered one evening after I came back from a walk. "You've been acting weird. Are you having a midlife crisis? Should I expect a motorcycle in the driveway next?" I smiled faintly and said nothing. There was power in not giving her the reaction she wanted. That silence, once forced and full of swallowed hurt, now belonged to me. The moment I chose to leave wasn't planned, but it was perfect in its simplicity. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie she had chosen, something she insisted was smart humor, though every joke was another dig at people like me. Midway through, she paused the film and turned to me. "You've been incredibly dull lately," she said. "Honestly, if this is how you're going to be in your 40s, I'm not sure how I'll survive you in your 50s. You used to at least try to be interesting." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the woman I had once fallen for, but the embodiment of every reason I was finally ready to go. Her words didn't hurt anymore. They sounded tired. Recycled. The venom had lost its sting. I stood up slowly. "You won't have to worry about surviving me in my 50s, I said calmly. "You won't be there." She blinked at me, confused for a moment, then narrowed her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm leaving, Grace," I said, steady and certain. "Not in a week, not in a month. I'm leaving now. I've already found a place. I'm already packed. This, us, is over." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She hadn't expected this. For all her mockery, all her dominance in the relationship, the idea of me actually walking away was never part of her equation. I watched as the realization washed over her like cold water. She wasn't in control anymore. "I don't believe you," she said, finally. "You wouldn't just leave." "But I would." And I did. I picked up the suitcase I had stored in the hallway closet. I'd packed it quietly 2 nights before, tucking away the essentials, just enough to start over. I walked to the door, turned one last time to see her sitting stunned on the couch, and said, "Mock me all you want, Grace. But you'll be the only one listening now." Then I stepped out, closing the door behind me with the soft finality of someone who knows they'll never walk back through it again. In the days following my departure, the silence was intoxicating. Not the kind that feels lonely or empty, but the kind that wraps around you like a warm coat after too long in the cold. For the first time in years, there was no one criticizing how I loaded the dishwasher, how I folded my shirts, or how I sipped my coffee too loudly. I hadn't realized how deeply her voice had embedded itself into every corner of my life until it was gone. I moved into a modest apartment just outside the city, nothing glamorous, just a clean space with creaky floors, chipped paint in the hallway, and a window that overlooked a tree-lined street. It was small, but it was mine. There was no scented candle I didn't ask for, no pristine throw pillows I couldn't touch, no curated bookshelf meant to impress guests. Just books I actually read and music I actually loved. Every inch of that space felt like a breath of air I'd been denied for too long. At first, Grace didn't call. She didn't text either. I half expected a barrage of angry messages or a dramatic appearance at my door, but instead, there was nothing. Just silence. Maybe she didn't believe I would really follow through. Maybe she thought I'd come crawling back once the dust settled. Grace had always been sure of her place in my life, so sure that she never questioned whether her absence would matter more than her presence. It took exactly 9 days before I heard from her. Her name flashed across my phone screen while I was unpacking a box of old records I hadn't touched in years. I let it ring. She called again an hour later. I ignored it. Then came the text, "We need to talk. Please." I stared at the message for a while before putting the phone down. I didn't owe her my time anymore. That realization settled in slowly but firmly. I wasn't trying to teach her a lesson or get revenge, I was simply done offering pieces of myself to someone who mistook them for scraps. Later that evening, a second message came. This one was longer. "I didn't realize how quiet this house would be without you. I keep hearing things, your footsteps, your laugh, even your awful humming in the shower. I used to mock it, but now, the silence is unbearable." There was a time when that message would have shattered me, when I would have felt an ache in my chest and rushed to fix whatever pain she was experiencing. But now, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of justice. Not vengeance. Just truth catching up to her. Grace had always filled the air with noise, sarcasm, complaints, passive-aggressive sighs, but now she was left alone with the echoes. The same laughter she once weaponized, the jokes she cracked at my expense, now lingered in the rooms like ghosts. She hadn't lost a husband who screamed or lashed out. She lost the man who quietly endured, who gave chance after chance, who stayed far past the point of personal dignity. I learned that when someone builds their identity around diminishing you, your departure doesn't just create a void, it dismantles the structure they've built. And Grace, who had always found power in making me feel small, now had no one left to stand over. She sent a third message the next morning, "Can we just talk? Not to fix things. I just miss you. The real you." I think I forgot how much I loved that man. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I was finally prioritizing myself. I was in therapy, journaling, reconnecting with old friends, even joining a hiking group. Each step wasn't some cinematic transformation, but a steady return to the version of myself that existed long before Grace's ridicule reshaped me. One evening, I visited a local bookstore and ran into an old college friend, Michelle. We'd lost touch over the years, but the conversation flowed easily, effortlessly, like a song you still remembered the lyrics to. She laughed at my jokes, genuinely. Not with a roll of the eyes or a patronizing smirk, but with warmth. And in that moment, I realized just how starved I'd been for simple kindness. Back at my apartment that night, I read through Grace's last message once more. Then I deleted it. She wasn't the villain in a dramatic tragedy, nor was I the hero rising from ashes. We were just two people who had long since stopped seeing each other clearly. The difference was, I'd finally found the courage to walk away. And she, perhaps for the first time, was left to sit in the silence of her own making. In the end, Grace didn't lose me because I stopped loving her. She lost me because she treated my love like it was disposable. And now, all she had left were memories, ones she had drowned out for years with mockery and indifference. But me? I had peace. And that was more than enough. Freedom didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic sunrise moment where everything suddenly felt lighter. Instead, it came quietly, through the absence of tension, the softness of solitude, the rediscovery of simple pleasures that had once been buried under a mountain of emotional exhaustion. In the early days after I left, I didn't celebrate. I adjusted. I learned to sit with myself without questioning every thought. There was no longer a second voice hovering nearby, waiting to twist my words into something foolish or mock my decisions before I'd even made them. That absence, at first unfamiliar, gradually began to feel like a gift. I spent more time outdoors, walking in the nearby park, sitting by the lake, watching the light shift across the water. These were small things, but they were mine. I didn't need to explain why I liked them. I didn't need to justify how I spent my afternoons or defend my quietness. For the first time in years, I was allowed to simply exist without being critiqued for it. There were moments, of course, when my mind drifted back to her. Not with longing, but with clarity. I thought about how often I had laughed at my own expense just to keep the peace. How many dreams I had delayed, not because I didn't believe in them, but because I knew she would ridicule them the moment they left my mouth. That was the true weight I had carried, her voice echoing in my head long after the words had been spoken. But as the days passed, those echoes began to fade. My inner monologue changed. I no longer filtered my thoughts through the lens of her potential reactions. I found my own rhythm again, the cadence of a man who didn't need to shrink to be accepted. One afternoon, I sat at a cafe I used to walk by for years but never entered. Grace always scoffed at places like that, calling them pretentious spots for people with nothing better to do. But I went anyway. I brought a book, ordered a coffee exactly the way I liked it, and sat by the window with the sunlight warming my face. I didn't care if it looked ridiculous or if someone thought I didn't belong there. I belonged wherever I chose to be. That feeling, of choice, of agency, became my anchor. I started reconnecting with old hobbies, not because I was trying to reinvent myself, but because I finally had space to remember what I enjoyed. I began writing again, not just in a journal, but stories and reflections that had long been gathering dust inside me. The words flowed easily, unburdened by the fear of being dismissed. And then there were people. New ones. Real conversations with individuals who asked about me without judgment, who listened without trying to reshape me. It was startling how quickly I remembered how to laugh, freely, without hesitation. Not the kind of laugh that hides discomfort, but the full, unguarded kind that makes your chest ache in the best way. Grace did reach out a few more times, sporadically, each message tinged with a growing sense of regret. I didn't block her. I didn't lash out. I just stopped responding. Not out of cruelty, but because I no longer had anything to prove. I had given her years. What I owed now, was to myself. The room we once shared still exists, of course. But it's just a room now. And her voice, once so loud in it, now exists only in memory. Her mockery, which used to crush me, now echoes into nothingness, lost in a space she no longer occupies. I am not bitter. I am not angry. I am simply free.